Thank you all. And we're starting with a very emotional topic. For 10 billion people, Bitcoin is for everybody. We need to allow everybody to make Bitcoin transactions, receive them, get paid. Every merchant, maybe even every robot or every AI agent. So how do we do this? Before we start, I'm going to introduce my two panelists. That's Portland Hodel, a Bitcoin contributor and educator. Here's Brandon Black, also known as Reardon or Reardon Code, evangelist and educator, and a Bitcoin improvement activist. I'm Leo. I'm involved with the Vancouver group. I'm involved with Lightning Labs. I'm very passionate about using Bitcoin as money. But for that, we need to make a lot of transactions. And in the past, we had a lot of emotional scars and been a lot of drama around probably the most obvious solution of them all, and that was to increase the blocks. What do you think of that?
No, absolutely not.
I think we should dynamically reduce the block size.
So we can't increase the blocks because there's been some very clear answers. What else do we do to bring, if we can't put the transactions of 10 billion people into the blockchain, where do we put them? How do we treat them? How do we get each transaction in the blockchain to be more valuable?
Well, one thing I want to go back to the block size question for just one more second here, because I think the question of changing the Bitcoin block size, as you said, there's a lot of emotional damage around it, but we have to be realistic about what can happen right now. And people are like, oh, we don't need to make that many transactions. But even to get every person on Earth just one UTXO, and then they never make another transaction after that, would be a multi-year, I think it's a 5-year project. So we do need to do something to scale Bitcoin, but increasing the blocks, they have to get so large. There was research that said you'd have to go to 133 megabyte blocks to support everyone having their own Lightning channel. So that's not a feasible solution. We need to do something else. And now we can go on to the rest of what Leo asked there.
Well, I guess I'd like to bring up, why don't we just uncork the block size, right? And for the maybe beginners, the thing about Bitcoin is the data set that represents, or the transactions that are your money, if you increase that size too large, you can't actually verify your own money on consumer hardware. And so there have been attempts in the past to do this. Bitcoin Cash, the block size, they went to 4, now 32. And there's my favorite example, though, finally, some fork decided to go to a very large size of 4 gigabyte. Every 10 minutes, you get a DVD's worth of storage on your node for these transactions, and it ended up in catastrophe with, you had basically 3 nodes that ran this. So that's why we can't just do this on Bitcoin, have our 8 billion transactions a day kind of thing, and now we're talking about the alternatives.
Yeah, maybe Reardon, you can start with explaining in simple terms, how does Lightning help scale Bitcoin? What's the mechanism that allows us to then now have more transactions and more users?
Yeah, I mean, so Lightning, we're talking about scaling Bitcoin, and if we're going to scale Bitcoin, what does it mean to scale Bitcoin? The first thing, at least in my mind, that it means to scale Bitcoin is that the people using the scaled Bitcoin still have self-custody. If we scale Bitcoin and users lose self-custody, then we just have paper Bitcoin Summer. And paper Bitcoin Summer is great, but that's not self-custody Bitcoin. And so Lightning is amazing in that it retains the self-custody aspect of Bitcoin while enabling more transactions. And the way that it does that is pairs of people can make what's called a payment channel between them, where they put some coins together into a single UTXO that they share control of, but each of them at any time can unilaterally close out that channel and get their coins back, and the other party gets their own coins back. And that unilateral exit retains, therefore, the self-custody properties of Bitcoin. So that's a single payment channel. And then the Lightning Network enables people to make payment channels with many other people and then route payments between them. So I could have a channel with Leo and with Portland, and then Portland could pay Leo through those channels through my node. And that's the way Lightning achieves scaling of Bitcoin, is that pairs of people can make these channels, and then anybody connected through that network can pay each other.
But you've kind of omitted a little imperfection of the whole thing with Lightning. You're scaling Bitcoin by transaction volume between existing participants, but how do we get everybody involved in a sovereign way with Lightning?
We don't yet.
We need a lot more space for those UTXOs, because every time you want to create a pair, maybe me and Brandon, or I just want to enter the Lightning Network, I got to pair with somebody. That means one UTXO is created in a block, and we have a limited space of those. So problem is kind of solved. I can make many transactions between me and you to him, but at the end of the day, getting everybody on Lightning, or even getting everybody out of Lightning, can be a little bit of a problem, and not to even mention some of the negative effects of that, which is with Lightning channels, if any of you guys have had them, you may not use them a lot, and then the fees to exit are quite a bit, because just your timing is not perfect. So.
Yeah, so what Lightning does there is it amortizes fees from any transactions across one on-chain transaction. So if you use few transactions, your total cost per Lightning transaction could be just as high as a regular on-chain transaction would have been. So it's not a perfect solution. It doesn't scale people as much, and it doesn't solve problems for infrequent transactors as well. Lightning is great for frequent small transactors.
There's also a note about Lightning that's pretty cool, though. So once we have our channel, our UTXOs made, opened, we get instant settlement between us. That is not a property you can find on Bitcoin. So
it's also not a property you can find in fiat, by the way.
Technically, yes.
Lightning is the only global digital payments network with instant cash finality, as Jack Mallers likes to say.
So before we talk a bit about how to now improve on Lightning and how to solve the scaling problems with Lightning, what other scaling solutions are currently out there? What other second layers?
You have...
there aren't any.
I mean, you don't have any unilateral exit or self-custodial versions, but there are many alternatives or ways you can kind of do trust trade-offs, essentially. Basically, layer 2s or side chains are typically one of those definitions. And
you go into a bit of the trust trade-offs?
Yeah, so basically, other than ARK, there are ways, essentially, you can create what's called a multi-signature in Bitcoin, and that is basically you have many people that govern the exit of money from a account. Think of like, basically, I can put my Bitcoin into an account with you and Brandon, and you promise me that you'll take care of the accounting on your own database. It's not trustless. I'm trusting you guys. But you say, I will give you a bunch of different features. Instant settlement. I will give you lots of blocks. You can do whatever you want. Arbitrary execution. You can make all sorts of whatever program you want.
DeFi, shitcoins, whatever you want.
Sure, yes. So essentially, yeah, you'll tell me you'll do all of that. I trust you that you'll honor that. And then when I say I want my money back, you guys will sign, if the state is correct, and give me my money back. That's similar to Liquid. You basically give them your Bitcoin, and you say, I trust you, bro. And they let you, and they let you do all the things.
What are the risks of me using Liquid today?
The risk of using Liquid primarily is, one, the state machine, so that the actual Liquid network doesn't compute something correctly, and it says you have no money, which is probably very low. The other risk is that Blockstream censors your out. So basically, you peg in with 10 Bitcoins, because I am all in on Liquid today, and you are suddenly deemed to be bad, and Blockstream caves to the pressure, and their multi-sig scheme, which I don't know a whole lot, it's not very transparent, they won't sign for some reason, or there's an error while signing, you cannot get your Bitcoin out.
So you called these side chains. Let's, for the rest of the discussion, dismiss the side chains, because
Sure.
they do not have this unilateral exit, and they have this odd trade-offs around self-custody. What makes a state chain different from how it works? How does it allow for unilateral exit, which side chains don't?
So a state chain is another way that has been proposed for scaling Bitcoin. And the way a state chain works is, roughly speaking, that a coordinator and the holder of a UTXO collaborate to shift ownership of that UTXO to a new owner. And the assumption that is made there is that either one of those two parties will delete the keys for the previous state of the state chain. And as long as each pair along the state chain deletes the keys, either one, then the state chain is held with unilateral exit for the last holder. So this is a weaker assumption than the Lightning assumption. In the Lightning assumption, you always have unilateral exit, and there's no co-signing required by another party or no deletion of keys. The state chain assumption does depend on previous holders deleting their keys, but it's a reasonably good assumption, because they would have to intentionally screw you at some point in the past. They can't screw you today if they decide to today. They had to do it in the past. So that's the state chain assumption. Mercury Layer was the implementation of that, and it enables one UTXO to change ownership, as opposed to in Lightning, you can just shift funds back and forth on a UTXO that already exists. With a state chain, you can move a UTXO to new holders by using the state chain assumption with the deleted keys.
Have you used it? Have you made experiences with it? Would you?
I have not personally.
Same here. I do not know a
What
lot
are
about
the
state chains.
and what are the use cases for it? I can imagine some, but for Lightning, it's much more obvious to me of like why I would today. I've used it multiple times today.
Well, I think, honestly, the use cases are very limited for state chains exactly as we described. For those who don't know, there's a new protocol on the block called Spark from LightSpark is the company name. And that protocol uses this same state chain style assumption to create a system where they can take a single large UTXO that they control and divide it out to many holders using the state chain assumption, and let many holders get pieces of that, enabling them to put hundreds or thousands of people into a single UTXO that share ownership in it. And then they create this chain of state chains that divide down the tree to let everyone have a unilateral exit. There was a big post on X just the other day where Spark announced they have completed the unilateral exit function of this protocol. So that's very cool. I would say that LightSpark and Spark does make a slightly weaker still trust assumption than Lightning or original state chains, because the original UTXO for Spark, in order to enable this tree of users to all use the system. So I encourage everyone to go out and try Spark, because it is a very cool user experience, because you can instantly onboard everything that we don't like about Lightning and everything we don't like about Bitcoin on-chain is all solved in LightSpark. Instant onboarding, instant payments, no need for liquidity, no need for any of the things that are bad about using Bitcoin normally. You can use Spark, but to get that, you're trusting one party, and that's Spark themselves or LightSpark themselves, to delete the keys. Now they have a trusted execution environment. They're going to publish the code that says they delete the keys. It's not a terrible trust assumption, but in order to get all these features they got, they did have to make a weaker trust assumption. So something to think about, and it's a cool protocol.
Question real quick. So the UTXOs you're creating, are those virtual UTXOs or those actually on-chain UTXOs for the state chain?
With a Mercury state chain, you take one UTXO, and the ownership of that UTXO moves.
Okay.
With Spark, they take one UTXO, and they split that UTXO into a tree of virtual UTXOs that do not hit the chain.
So in the Spark implementation, these virtual UTXOs, you can basically from one create many, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say you end up with 2 billion of these things at the bottom. How do we get everybody out?
It would take log n transactions in math. That just means you take the reverse of an exponent. So 2 to the x would be the number of transactions, or 2 to the x transactions to get x people.
It's a lot.
It can be a lot of transactions. One way to look at it is, no, I'm not even going to try. I retract that statement. It would be a lot of transactions, but it wouldn't be that many. It would be something on the order of 1,000 transactions to get everybody out of to get one person unilaterally out of a 2 billion person Spark graph.
But all owners of these 2 billion UTXOs would depend on the same provider for execution.
Correct.
And that is somewhat similar to Arc, correct? So Arc is not something that exists in production today, but it's something that we have a pretty good idea about now how it works, and getting an even better idea of what its constraints might be. How would that differ from Spark, or where would those trade-offs be more favorable towards one or the other? Maybe Portland.
I don't know enough about Arc that's not a topic I can dive into.
I'll try to quickly cover it and compare it to Spark, because I think it's an important comparison. So Spark's in production. Arc is not quite, although there are two companies with working implementations on test networks. And Arc and Spark are very similar in the user experience. They're very similar in the kind of functionality provided. The difference is that Arc pre-commits before it makes a UTXO to who's going to be in that UTXO, whereas Spark allows the Spark operator to split a UTXO as needed for new users. And that difference is very important. It means that onboarding onto Arc requires you to wait for a transaction to make a new UTXO, including you. But it also means that there's not the same trust problem. You have a true unilateral exit with no trust in the provider when you are inside of an Arc. Whereas in Spark, you must trust that the provider did delete the keys in the past in order for you to have unilateral exit. So trade-offs, you have to wait for an onboarding to get true trustless in Arc. You never have true trustless, but you immediately have the best you're going to get with Spark. And so different trade-offs, they both end up with this situation where many people can share one UTXO, which is awesome because that lets us maybe onboard more people into Bitcoin. They both let you have Lightning-style transactions where it's instant cash finality, all those cool things both protocols get, and they let us scale the number of holders of Bitcoin.
One amazing thing about Bitcoin on-chain that, some of us may miss is that we just need to have a seed phrase or a private key, and we can leave that there forever. And we know that if we were to come back in a couple of 100 years from our cryogenic journey, our Bitcoin is still there. But how does that work in Lightning? How does that work in Spark? How does that work in Arc? How do I have to worry about my channels being online or my liquidity provider staying solvent?
So specifically with Lightning, because your intermediate state, so like as we're trading back and forth, moving our UTXOs, it's as good as gold. It's an actual transaction. The last state, as long as it gets broadcast, not lost, you can always just dump it on chain. Even in 100 years, if those UTXOs are still valid, you can absolutely spend it. Your partner may decide, if he's still online and you fall off, he may broadcast a state that's earlier, where money went from him to you. He'll broadcast his version where he didn't spend, if you're not online. But if you're online, you can absolutely contest that. So that's specifically with Lightning, it's good as gold. So
my coins never disappear, but if my channel partner decides to cheat me while I'm on a holiday in a remote location or cryogenically frozen, then I have something to worry about. How does that work in Arc, Reardon?
Yeah, so in Arc and Spark, here's a place where Spark may be a little better on the trust assumption than Arc. There's no expiration of your partial UTXO in Spark. It's there, it's there forever. As long as in the past, the Spark provider did delete those keys, you have a good as gold unilateral claim to that UTXO forever. So that's a cool feature of Spark. Arc is different. With Arc, every virtual UTXO in Arc expires. So you have Bitcoin, and your claim to that Bitcoin expires if you don't roll it over periodically. And the exact period is still to be determined, but there's some periodic rollover needed to maintain your unilateral control of that Bitcoin. In my opinion, that's a pretty good situation, but it is something to be aware of. If you're planning to get cryogenically frozen, Spark would be a better choice than Arc, and on-chain would be the best. Lightning has nuances, as Portland said. You would not want to get cryogenically frozen with your Bitcoin in an Arc.
So how does that look in practice? Do I need to just open my wallet every few days or every few weeks?
Yeah, exactly. The implementations of Arc, both of them have automatic rollover when it gets close to the expiration time. There's open questions around these Arc things of what the fees are going to be for rollover, because the Arc provider has to front liquidity for a time period during that rollover. And so they're going to charge you something for that. We don't know exactly what that charge is going to be like yet. But yes, you just have to open your wallet. It'll automatically do it. You'll probably preset, I'm willing to pay up to 0.01% every time I roll over, and then the wallet will just do it automatically when you do it.
So what do you expect these future onboarding processes to look like? What do you expect these future experiences to look like? If I now have, let's say we now have 9 billion people using Bitcoin, what is this 10 billionth person, what does their experience look like? What costs do you believe they have to incur? And what meaningful limitations are there for owning Bitcoin? I know it's a long.
I don't got a good one on that.
But maybe just piece it together from what we discussed, like between Lightning and Arc and Spark and on-chain. Do you believe people are gonna onboard on one over the other and graduate? Do people graduate from Spark from Arc into Spark and from Spark into Lightning? And another fascinating topic is, what do you think? I mean, this is a very practical question, but it's also a fascinating scaling question. What is a good UTXO size if I want to stack sats?
Yeah.
And then how many people can hold UTXOs? And how many people? Yeah.
So many questions.
So I'll start with that. Absolutely, Lightning is not going to facilitate the 10 billion people question. There's no way we can get enough people in. On the side of Spark and Arc, I just don't know enough of the technical details on basically how you enter these things. And so I can't.
And exit will always be an issue.
Yeah, exit will always be an issue for sure. Yeah. So
I think honestly, I'm wearing this Paper Bitcoin summer tank top as a joke on the one hand, but also because it's legit. Most people will initially come to Bitcoin in Paper Bitcoin. And then they're going to get interested in what Bitcoin can do for them and what it might look like to have more sovereign access. And this is the same as happens with gold or even with cash. You know, whatever money you use, a lot of times you're going to start with it being held by someone else. And paper Bitcoin lets you have Bitcoin held by someone else for you. And so that's really what the onboarding is going to look like. And then people will look at the alternatives that are out there, and many people will want to have more control over their funds, and especially people in places with bad governments. And that's, I think, the most important thing that Bitcoin offers. And you know, we're here at Bitcoin is for everyone, and Bitcoin is for everyone, and the more evil your government is doing around money, the more you need Bitcoin, and the more you need to get off of paper Bitcoin. And so for those people, I think solutions like Arc or even custodial solutions like eCash, where you still have a private claim to some Bitcoin, but it's still an IOU. And Arc works a lot like eCash in many ways, except that it's less custodial. So I think the answer to the onboarding question is it depends who you are, it depends where in the world you are. Bitcoin is for everyone, but it's for everyone in different ways. So paper Bitcoin for some people, I think Arc is a great thing for people who are, call it, chronically online. If you're online a lot, Arc is great. Maybe Spark is better for people who are willing to take a little bit more trust, but they're not online all the time. And so I'm glad all these solutions are being developed. And to onboard, to kind of just finish out this thought, people will get some Bitcoin, their paper Bitcoin provider will send the Bitcoin over the Lightning Network to their Arc or Spark or eCash provider as they go on to a less custodial solution.
But to pin you quickly on one specific point, doesn't that also mean that the more authoritarian our governments are, the less trust we have in our financial system, the less scalable Bitcoin is?
Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's somewhat true. That at least right now, the only solution that scales to enough people is paper Bitcoin, but Arc and Spark could get there.
But I mean, the 10 billion people question, we don't have 10 billion people here today. The mempool is clearing right now. Like we need more UTXOs on chain. You can literally, for pennies, sub 1 sat per VByte is now a reality. You can, for literally 20 cents, buy the coffee with Bitcoin. But by the time we get to that point, won't Bitcoin have most likely soft forked in better solutions for self-custody, potentially CTV, Vault, et cetera, that will allow for people to create virtual UTXOs in a more trustless manner, reducing these kind of trade-offs from Spark and Arc? Or are we just going to go with the assumption that Bitcoin is what it is today, and we're just only going to soft fork the time state bug?
Can you please quickly explain what Portland means?
The short version is that right now, both Spark and Arc and even Lightning depend heavily on pre-signed transactions. So we probably mostly all know, but I'll say it anyway, Bitcoin is mostly a network of transactions where you have a key and then a signature, and the signature authorizes the movement of some funds. And what Arc, Spark, and Lightning all use today is pre-signed transactions to facilitate their amazing off-chain layer 2 features. And what Portland mentioned CTV, but there's also a new proposal out there called template hash. They're very similar. But what both of those facilitate is the ability to have a predicted transaction, a future transaction without a signature. And that reduces the coordination and trust required to implement these off-chain protocols, these layer 2s, which could enable, potentially, many more people to trustlessly share UTXOs in the future. So I would say I'm optimistic that we will continue improving the Bitcoin base protocol so that not only people using the base protocol itself can have better experience, but also future layer 2 solutions can have better user experience for people as well.
So this is like about covenants allowing multiple people to own a single UTXO. Is that right?
Yeah, without using pre-signed transactions as we do today.
And how would that hugely improve Spark and Arc? Would that make Spark and Arc redundant? How would that impact? How would these future soft forks impact the scalability, but also practicability of these currently evolving ideas? Maybe Portland, yes.
No, I'm good on this one.
All right. I think the big thing here is that CTV, or the covenant conversation you may hear on X or elsewhere that you kind of get your Bitcoin content, the primary idea behind covenant is to make all of this kind of off-chain layer 2 type scaling better. And they do that by reducing the amount of interactivity required. So right now, in a Lightning channel, you have to go back and forth signing transactions for every update to the Lightning channel. We can reduce how many times you have to go back and forth for each update with CTV and checksake from stack. With Arc, the entire Arc tree to create a new Arc pool has to be signed by everyone in that tree to create a new Arc tree. We can get that down to just a single signature at the root of the tree instead of signing the whole thing if we have CTV. And there's similar improvements to other kind of more complex, farther out there proposals like BitVM, or there's also like discrete log contract-based things. These covenant proposals hopefully make all of that better. They reduce the amount of complexity in the protocol and the amount of interactivity as well to make it easier to scale Bitcoin and safer to scale Bitcoin where there's less room for error in how we build the protocols.
Does it because it makes exit easier, or because it makes exit cheaper, or because it makes exit less important or redundant?
It definitely makes exit cheaper. So signatures are large. In Bitcoin, a signature is 64 bytes. If you have, and you need a key for it as well. If you have CTV to facilitate an exit, instead of 64 bytes plus 32 bytes to make an exit, you will need just 32 bytes for the hash of a transaction. So you do get more efficient exit from these protocols if you have CTV as well.
And of course, a lot of this ability to exit is dependent on not just the Bitcoin price, but also the Bitcoin fees. Let's do a little bit of like basic calculations. Like, what can we currently meaningfully self-custody on chain or in Lightning?
Currently, like just today, $1. Like if you're willing to spend 20% of that in fees, yeah, $1. If you want to spend $5, you can literally any on-chain transaction.
That's really great. The fact that we can custody
20 cents. That's all it takes.
That's actually amazing.
Yep.
So even if we were to go up 10x, 100x in price, we could still somewhat meaningfully custody Bitcoin.
This is a very unique period in time. Like it is, the reality is it's usually about like, in terms of fiat exchange rate, $1 or about
because of on-chain fees?
Yeah, on-chain fees specifically. Assuming you're taking your Bitcoin and the exchange isn't marking up, you're just going on to on-chain.
Because of course our discussion on scaling kind of implies that there will be a lot of demand for Bitcoin, and that demand will translate into higher block space demand, and we can't produce more block space, so the fees will go up.
Absolutely, 100%. So you can go.
I just want to make the counterpoint. I think Bitcoin has scaled for the most part. Lightning and Paper Bitcoin have made it so that fees are low to use Bitcoin. You can use Bitcoin for small amounts. It's fine. And I think that state is likely to persist because of things like Arc and Spark, where people with small amounts, if you want to hold $1 of Bitcoin, you'll put it in a Spark or an Arc. And that means that the chain will remain usable for small and medium amounts in the like $100,000, $200,000 of Bitcoin. It will remain usable, I think.
Absolutely. And the other thing as well to kind of think about is like the kind of trust guarantees you're getting on main chain aren't necessarily required for values that you're discussing for a Spark or an Arc. I don't need to have gigawatts of energy burn my transaction into this immutable time chain so that 100 years, I guess it is generational wealth. So
My 10
I take that
sats
back.
of generational wealth.
Yes. But yeah, with that said, definitely like even scaling solutions like that will allow you to potentially even use sub-dust amounts in a UTXO until you can afford to even meet the dust threshold to be able to get it onto the time chain. But yeah, with anything of that small value, potentially the trade-offs may make sense. A lot of times it's better than Paper Bitcoin itself.
Anyone have any questions for these guys? Want to come on up to the mic?
And regarding the Spark protocol, in the same way that River has developed its proof of reserves, is there anything that you're aware of that's being developed within Spark? So again, there is a similar anecdote.
So once the Spark protocol builds a tree of real virtual UTXOs. So every virtual UTXO is held by someone, and those are all, each person has their own unilateral exit for that. So there isn't a risk of rehypothecation in the same way, assuming that each current holder of a virtual UTXO can trust the previous deletion of keys as required by the state chain assumption. So there isn't the same need for proof of reserves. They couldn't rehypothecate it. So instead, what they need to do is create attestations to prove that their software is indeed deleting those keys, and that's roughly the equivalent.
All right, we got another question right here.
I'll just go up to this.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so Lightning has the nice property that the transactions are onion routed. So, you might make an effort to get to know your peers, but it's pretty unlikely that you could be a discriminating router amongst your transactions. Can you speak to how Spark or Arc, service provider, do they have enough visibility into the transactions that they could censor specific transactions?
That is very implementation specific. From what I know of what they're building out there, they've put in a certain limited amount of privacy into how they're identifying their users, and that they're identifying them only by keys, not by kind of a name or something, which gives them a greater difficulty of kind of being intentional in blocking certain transactions. But certainly, if you're going to use one of these protocols, you are more subject to the whims of a company.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm relatively new in this space. I was curious as far as what bottlenecks you were foreseeing and how you would address those.
The current bottleneck is 100% just block space itself. So the ability to get your UTXO on chain for an affordable amount, because to get into the next block, you have to bid. And so depending on demand, that can fluctuate. Like right now, it's basically nothing, to $50, $100 we've seen during these previous bull runs. And the kind of solutions that we were discussing today allow you to kind of make some better trade-offs about that. So the Lightning example, basically you can go in once and then use it many times and then leave. You still have to pay a fee each way, but you get to choose. And then Spark and Arc also give you the ability to kind of get in and then potentially get out later and not have to pay that fee. So, but block space is the constraint.
Do you have some numbers in your heads? How many transactions per block, let's say we use purely on-chain?
I do. The number of transactions per block peaks around 7,000 if they're all very efficient, very small, like one in, one out, but that's not the reality. We end up with typically 2,000 to 3,000 transactions every 10 minutes, which turns into a number of 7 transactions per second. So that means 7 people in this room in 1 second could transact on average.
I'll throw a small wrench on that, which is that it's better to look at the number of payments per second as opposed to the transactions. And I think it's a little higher in payments because some of those transactions are batch outputs from custodians. So those have more payments than the number of transactions. So, but it's not more than 10. It's a fairly small number of payments per second that Bitcoin supports, which is why we have things like Lightning, because Lightning supports essentially unlimited payments per second if people are already in their channels. So once people get on the Lightning Network, once you're onboarded to it, you have unlimited payments per second essentially within existing channels.
But you only then have a limited number of people being onboarded per second.
Or leaving.
Or leaving, yeah. That's, I guess, the hardest to calculate. Let's say we have 10 payments per second in the on-chain, pure on-chain case, and in the most optimistic case, we have 10 people being onboarded to the Lightning Network every 10 seconds. But of course, exiting the network costs more than entering it.
No, not necessarily, if I'm correct. Like you can enter a very high price, and you can also exit potentially at a lower price.
Oh, you mean block fees?
Oh, sorry, I apologize. Yes, my bad.
Well, and entering and exiting Lightning can both be the same cost essentially if it's cooperative. And so there's like a nuance here with Lightning, which is Lightning supports unilateral exit. And this is true of other unilateral exit protocols, Arc, Spark, Lightning, anything like this on Bitcoin. If you want to exercise that unilateral exit, there is a cost to it. So with the Lightning channel, if 2 parties collaboratively enter it and then exit it, the cost is essentially 2 small transactions of which thousands can fit in the block. But if you want to unilaterally exit from Lightning, that is 2 larger transactions just for that unilateral exit, because the Lightning Network has to encode the protections that ensure both parties unilateral exit into that exit process when it's just one person doing it without the cooperation of the other. And again, that applies to all of these protocols, and it's worse with Arc and Spark because of the tree of transactions. So there's no free lunch. I hope that's kind of clear from this conversation up here. There's not a free lunch here, but we can get different trade-offs in our throughput depending on which of these protocols we use.
I'm curious about time frame and the idea that, I don't know if you saw Eric Yakes' presentation, but he had a graph of Bitcoin adoption that led out, and in the end was unit of account, and then means of exchange. So to my eye on his graph, that means of exchange was pretty far out in time. But how do you guys view that?
Portland, is it happening already?
Bitcoin is a medium of exchange? I think it happened much more frequently in the past. So specifically, the peak medium of exchange, I think, was 2013, 2017, specifically with like Silk Road being used as a marketplace. Bitcoin was a true money back then. Mempool was typically full-ish. And today, there's a lot more self-custody. The NGU has created incentives to potentially not spend your Bitcoin because of the fact that you can spend other worse monies out there instead. And so, yeah, it's definitely trending right now, I think, to store value. And I would like to see it actually trend more towards medium.
So we're looking at other scaling limitations that are outside of the technical sphere of Bitcoin.
Socially.
To do social, perceptive,
Absolutely.
Legal.
Yeah, and I think this question, some people look at this like store of value, unit of account, medium exchange, as though it's some linear path. And as Portland pointed out, it's more like it goes back and forth. It's different amounts to different people. Like Bitcoin is my unit of account, and it may be someone who lives in certain places in the world might be their medium of exchange. It just depends on who you are and where you are, what function Bitcoin serves for you. What Bitcoin is a censorship-resistant, decentralized money system that anybody can use, and they can use it for whatever serves their purposes best.
I would like to, yeah, I think that's a very important point that countries like specifically the United States, like we have a pretty good money overall in terms of currency, very important distinction, where it doesn't depreciate too quickly, right? But if you go to countries such as like Nigeria, for example, I've worked with a lot of Bitcoin-based businesses over there, like that is absolutely a medium of exchange that people do use very frequently. So
The U.S. is famously intensely overbanked.
Yes.
Overbanked, nice word.
So yeah,
So the cypherpunk future is just unevenly distributed.
So my biggest problem with paying in Bitcoin is I'm usually incentivized to use a credit card that has cash back. How do you guys see Bitcoin addressing that issue in the future?
in terms of using your credit card for basically getting some sort of reward system, you're technically, okay, I'm back up real quick. So the reason why Bitcoin solves this is the fact that the credit card system is even able to present you with rewards points is because of kind of like a fiat mindset. Like you're technically getting overcharged and somebody's gonna pay you back that money because you paid it anyways. And so with that said, it's the accessibility that the merchant's after to get the credit cards, overcharge you so you can get that 2% back. The people paying actual money are basically paying that overage. So it kind of culminates in like, Bitcoin will solve that because you could run the exact same thing over Lightning, but you could just pay lower prices overall because you don't have to even have that credit card merchant there in the first place to create this whole system of kind of false incentives.
Rather an upfront discount of 5% than 4% cashback.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what you've seen. I don't know if you followed the Steak and Shake saga. They started taking Bitcoin, and they noticed that the cost of accepting Bitcoin was materially, significantly lower than the cost of accepting credit cards. And they said, I mean, I don't know how true it is because it's marketing, but they said that they were able to then reinvest that in improving their food products in certain directions towards a certain subset of Bitcoin ethos. But I think there's truth to some degree in that Bitcoin is cheaper to receive because there's no chargebacks, there's no fraud, et cetera, like there is with credit cards. And that does help reduce costs, which merchants can then pass on as savings to consumers instead of a cashback on your credit card.
The middleman's open source. Essentially, like the middleman for the credit card companies removed and replaced with open source software, which creates good competition. If you try to be a Lightning routing node for my business and you're, hey, I want my 5%, well, okay, there's probably somebody else that's willing to charge a little bit less with still good enough connectivity.
So to sum up, Bitcoin is already scaling. Blocks
Yes.
are cheap. Open your Lightning channels today. Check out Spark. Put all your hopes into Arc, and then we still have tens and tens of magnitudes worth of improvements on these existing system. And if that only brings us to 1 billion people, then we'll still have to come up with something. Thank you very much. Give it up for Portland and for Reardon. And
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.